Now, in our daily life, we also should censor our words. Today, we are confronted with a tremendous array of bad taste in connection with words. Entertainment is loaded with words, thoughts, and attitudes now made vocal, which are against the better taste and judgment of mankind. We also know that the various plays have moral and psychological influence which is unworthy and unreasonable. Therefore, the answer is one way is to keep your mouth shut, and the other way to close your eyes. With those two objectives attained, the individual is then able to think for himself. The problem of rescuing the mind from exposure to ulterior motives and propaganda is a very real and serious problem today. Most of the difficulties that are confronting two-thirds of the world are due to words, badly chosen, backed by force, motivated by jealousies and greed, and with no values in the basic purposes of life. The Neoplatonists of Alexandria used the concept of words to be a sacred procedure, that any word that is spoken must come from the soul. If it does not arise in the soul and bring the mind into order, then it cannot be safely communicated to the outside world. All of the way along, the individual must put a bridle on his own tongue and must use words to be of value to society and to himself. Nearly everyone gets into trouble with words. Homes are broken by them, arguments split families wide apart. They also divide nations, continents, everything you can think of will come into verbal conflict over words. These words are used often to support physical force or to cause it. Actually, most of the troubles of mankind are due to too much talk and too many arguments, which are totally unnecessary. Many creatures do not speak. They do not need to, because habit and instinct and a kind of psychic overtone gives them the communication they need. With man, however, the problem of speech remains to the bitter end a matter of great concern to all human beings. Historians, of course, use words to influence the reader, and it is generally admitted today that 90% of history is written by victors at the expense of the vanquished. And we always make a villain out of the loser, regardless of the circumstances. So we have all kinds of problems in history. We take the words, we believe them, but we don't know whether they are true or not. We make truth choice on the basis of what we want or what we expect or what is in common to our present consideration. We decide that the historian is correct if we agree with him. He is incorrect if we disagree with him, when in reality the facts of the matter are seldom actually considered. Now another, we can say there's the use and misuse, and there is an abuse of words. Now, the most basic abuse of words, of course, was in the medieval and ancient times in magic, black magic. All kinds of spells and invocations came into existence for the purpose of injuring people, destroying enemies by psychic means, the invoking of spirits, the invoking of demoniacal monsters. The whole science of necromancy was based upon spells, conjurations of words. Also, we might know that as opposed to these are prayers, which are probably the highest usage that we make of words, is to pray if our prayer is simple and honest. If our prayer is greedy, or we are very highly selfish in our thinking religiously, then we fall back into trouble. But we may say that prayer is the white magic of words, and that necromancy spells and conjurations of the black magic. So that every word that we do say, regardless of what it is, has some kind of a consequence. It may be spoken to the winds, but it still has a consequence. It may be spoken in haste or at leisure, but it is still an important thing, and it is something that should not be allowed to escape the control of the will or the integrity. We find people who would never really hurt anyone who will lie about them. We know people who will gossip and who love to carry stories and things of that nature. We find others who have a tendency to downgrade anyone who is in their environment because of jealousies. We find all kinds of misuse of words to the satisfaction of negative attitudes or purposes. This is something that from the standpoint of our daily life we should give a lot of thought to, because over the telephone in the course of the day enough gossip goes back and forth to break 1,000 homes. It's not intended to do it. It's not done from complete viciousness, but it comes from the idea of communicating something not generally known and enjoying the sense of being party to a secret. In all substance, these things are wrong, and let's see, the vibratory consequences are worth considering. Suppose for a moment you have a little bit of gossip that sounds rather good to you. You want to tell your friends about it. There are things happening inside of yourself. The first thing that might happen to you would be to question the integrity of the information. This, however, is usually passed over lightly. We assume that our friend knew. The second problem is, who is it going to help? Is the sharing of this information going to improve something, or is it going to make something worse, discredit or disparage? Usually gossip and slander hurt, but that's not where it ends. That little phrase that hurts, or the thought behind it, keeps right on living. It gradually mingles with others, and gradually we build a political situation, or build a domestic situation, or a community situation, in which values are destroyed by loose talking, or by uninformed communication. All these things add up. They don't fade away. They do not disappear into oblivion. These things keep on living, and the ancient people believed that all these little thoughts became imps. All negative things were little demons. All beautiful things were little angels. And that the individual guards himself by surrounding his life only with good things. And the good things in this case being a consciousness within himself of fairness and integrity and of forgiveness. There are many cases in which forgiveness is an important problem in vocalization. People want to be forgiven, or they may want to forgive. The effort, however, may or may not be successful. In either case, we have the person vocalizing an attitude. And this vocalization, as my old phrenologist friend, Dr. Bronson, used to say, this is an attitude that comes out of your mouth and goes into your own ear. In other words, it goes around the side of your face and goes back to you. Whatever comes out of the mouth goes back into the mind. If there is inharmony, there is cruelty, there is thoughtlessness coming out of the mouth, that will return into the brain itself, or into the mind. And the problem of the mind as a factor in communication must always be remembered. Each person, before he settles down to becoming a philosopher or going into the higher mysticism, should make a fair estimation of his own character and temperament. He should look for the problems that are difficult for him, and if he is uncertain, he may be brave enough to ask a friend or two what they think about him. This takes a great deal of courage and has broken a great many friendships, but it is still a very useful thing to do. We should be grateful for it, but we seldom are. But in any event, these things, everything in life is a motion. It is a vibration. It is a living thing that affects other living things. and therefore thoughts are things. Words are things. The mere fact that there was no witness to what we said doesn't mean that it is not there and will remain. The witness may show up years from now, but within the individual himself, everything that he says and everything that is said to him has a life, has a vitality, has a continuance. The nagger sets up a pattern which turns against himself. Now, nature has many ways of punishing mistakes. In the most probable, common way, in words and things of that nature, is to punish them by getting someone else to say something unpleasant or unkind as a retort. It ends in an argument. The two individuals get locked in a debate which makes both of them ill, leaves them tired and distracted and unfit for the common responsibilities of living. We can't afford it, especially now. At this particular stage of our international relationships, words can be very dangerous. They can cause the individual to lose track of his own growth because he becomes immersed in something which he can do nothing about. It is much better to be calm, mild, thoughtful, and retain judgment and refrain from all personal animosities. We cannot afford to hate people even if they're wrong. We cannot afford to spread false rumors simply to become part of an electional procedure. These things endanger the future of nations, and they do the same thing in the private life of individuals. A little gossip and a little slander can break a home and destroy the lives of the children trying to grow up in that home. Everything that is possible in words and in thought and in action should be constructive. It must have a meaning that helps and not by meaning that hurts. It must add to something and not detract from anything. It should add to a better way of living. Therefore, we have another interesting division. The Greeks said that man speaks in prose, but the gods speak in verse. Most of the scriptural bookings of the world were originally in the form of poetry. The sagas and Eddas, the Upanishads, all the different sacred books were done originally in verse. Most of the Old Testament was at one time in verse. Verse was the language of the gods because it was rhythmic, harmonic, and beautiful. And it went along with a certain cadence within itself. It continued to appeal, and good poetry still is a marvelous civilizing force. So the gods spoke only in hexameter verse. Prose was the language of mortals, and as the immortality in us comes out, our prose becomes poetic. And therefore we have all kinds of minor poets who have never ascended to the great epic level, but who still have begun to find the charm and joy of saying things beautifully, saying them in a nice and gentle manner. Then we have some modern poetry like modern art, which is very poor, very fretful, very brittle. This does not help. The whole problem of life, whether it's in speech or action or thought, is that which is beautiful in principle is good. This means that it's beauty in the substance of itself, not in its appearance. But that which is beautiful means that which is ideal, idealistic, that which is harmonic, that which is reconciling of differences. All of these things become the burden and opportunity of the peacemaker, who is entirely and certainly rewarded for it. Blessed is the peacemaker. So we have in language all these things to think about. Our children today are not taught basic language. They are taught the names of things and believe if they hear the name that they know the thing. So if someone asks them what is a carrot, they are apt to say a vegetable and get the correct marking. But they don't know what a character is or a carrot or anything else. They do not understand, but they consider the subject closed by the name. And the same is true in many different developments of life. We give names to things, answer them according to their names, and consider that enough. This is one of the points that was made by Comenius and Holbeck in connection with education. The problem of finding out the name of things in terms of meaning. And the way to gain meaning is to recognize the basic vitality of the subject under discussion. Hartlib made the point of this, and so did Comenius. In other words, you have to be able to feel the facts of a thing, not merely listen to it by dictionary. You have to participate in the experience of something in order to know it. And that was why such an emphasis was placed upon preschool education. The problem is very certain that the faculties of true understanding have to be developed before schooling comes, or the schooling will be very largely rejected. We will finally end up with the individual memorizing the words and knowing nothing about the substance. So the person has to learn to recognize substance first. And the first substances of life are not learned in school, but in the preschool period of childhood, in which association with other adults or with others of its own age group these result in certain basic experiences of like and dislike, of acceptance and rejection. These things we gradually learn intuitively. Then when education comes, we give meaning to words. Otherwise we give no meaning, and we just keep on using words without giving them any substance, essence, or vitality. Students working with the various systems of thought today also will find a study of words very rewarding in connection with beliefs. We have probably 30 or 40 systems of religious philosophy in the world that are of some interest and importance. In almost all of these systems, there is a vocabulary. They have names for things. They have names for deity. They talk about the 72 names of God. All these things. But the real study of language and words gives us the full sense of this. In other words, these are not separate beings. These are separate language names for the same being. Instead, therefore, of having a group of pagans and heathens, we have divided from each other only by word for name. That the person who worships Brahma is the same person who worships some other deity under another name, but it is actually the same God. And the realization that this could in itself alone, through a study of language, practically end all sectarian differences of belief. Because if the quality of the beliefs are the same, but the names for it are different. And as long as we know them by their names only, and do not know their qualities, we are unable to cope with the situation. So everywhere meaning reconciles words, whereas ignorance keeps these words separated, creates civil wars over words, where there is no need for it at all. Now, in our modern life, we have another kind of problem that seems to be coming up, and that is the basing of language. The becoming more basal in its tonality. We have gone downward into what we might term basic English, but which is really very largely the lowest possible use of words. We use, therefore, profanity and many things of this nature, which become common usage, without realizing that all of these things are just as dangerous to our system as marijuana and cocaine. The destruction of the overtones of a language can be a great disaster to the human being. It can subjugate that human being to a level of life very much below that for which it was originally intended. It is necessary, therefore, to correct much of the problem of life through a better understanding of language. We have it here now more than we did have, because in this country, for instance, we are bringing in peoples of many different nations and races. We are creating a highly polyglot civilization, and these civilizations will remain more or less separated for several generations because of their ancestral backgrounds and because of their particular religious emphasis. various levels of language, the identities which they share together, it would be much more easy, or much more easily adapted to modern Western ways. We have to find answers to things that separate, and ignorance of the meaning of words is one of the great separating factors in civilization today. So we have to go after all such terms and also other terms. What is liberty? What is freedom? These are words that are bantered about. And yet what is freedom? Freedom cannot be merely the right to do as you please. Freedom cannot be every individual living his own life in a civilized society. There has to be some understanding of the word freedom, what it really means. And of course, in the last analysis, it really means the right of the individual to be right. It is his possibility to be what he should be, and which he never or very seldom actually is what he should be. So we have liberty as the right of the person to be a decent citizen, the right to have a free understanding of the good in all things, the right to appreciate his neighbor, the right to go above differences to the great essential unities of life. If these things are not appreciated, then the words have failed to carry their message. So we have all over today all kinds of cliques and clans and sects. We have anarchists and activists all fighting really over the same thing, all actually missing the point. Missing the real point of the whole thing being that truth makes peace, error makes war. If the individual understands the facts of his own faith correctly, he will discover that the faith of all others. But if he becomes merely a bigot of his own, and intolerant of all that he does not believe to be true, then when he attacks the other person's belief, he is only attacking his own belief under a different name. All of these things come out in the study. Now we have new words all the time. Words usually are increased by various specialists and special phases of life. As various arts and sciences have become increasingly complicated, new words are continuously invented. Some of these inventions are trivial, some of them are really of no significance whatever, but gradually a language builds up to immense proportions. And as it grows greater and greater, it has a tendency to separate the various strata of civilization. By the time we add 10 or 20,000 highly specialized words to our vocabulary, we have lost contact with millions of human beings to whom these terms will never be familiar and will never be generally useful. It is therefore very important that we divide language as the Egyptians did. The Egyptians had two kinds of language. They had the language of the marketplace and they had the language of the temple. The sacerdotal languages were not communicated to the public. You couldn't buy and sell apples with the sacerdotal languages. They had their own argot sufficient to the needs of commerce. But those higher terms of language were reserved for meaning that was exalted and was not going to be degraded by being tossed down to a group of persons who would never understand them. So that the languages are of two types. There is a language suitable to the physicist. There is a language that has a special meaning for the physician. There is a language that is particularly necessary in the courts of law. There are languages in laboratories and in research groups and in all kinds of trades and professions. But beside these, there has to be the common language. And that common language is simply the common usage of words for the purposes of living and the purposes of communication. We cannot communicate with specialists except in their own terms. And gradually they restrict their own interpretations until they subdivide into infinite numbers of groups. Yet behind it all, under it all, is the common language that we have to use for the needs of life. We have to say, I'm hungry, I'm tired. We have to say, I am old, I am young. And we have to use a whole world of common usage which should be kept as it is, primary and just. And no specialized language should contradict the general voice of the world. The specialized languages are for certain purposes, but no specialized language should be substituted for the basic language of our daily needs. Thus we may say that the place where the physicist and the homemaker meet will be in this common language. The common language of love, of friendship, of kindness, the common language of helpfulness, sympathy, remembrance. These things belong equally to all levels and constitute together with the statement of needs, purposes, and basic ideals, state the basic convictions of mankind.